When we look back into Scripture, we find a number of instances where God's people set up stones of remembrance.
You may remember that when Jacob was fleeing from his brother on his way to Paddan Aram, he stopped for the night. Jacob had probably never been away from home before. Now, as he stops for the night, he uses a stone for a pillow.
As he slept, he saw a ladder reaching from heaven to earth with angels ascending and descending. At the top of the ladder was God. God promised Jacob that he would bring him back home one day, and that his descendants would occupy all of the surrounding land.
In awe, Jacob called the place Bethel, meaning house of God, and took the stone he had used as a pillow and set it up as a memorial.
You may remember that when Joshua took the Israelites across the Jordan, that he commanded a man from each of the 12 tribes to take a stone out of the Jordan and set the stones up as a reminder that God had brought them through the wilderness and into the land of Canaan.
Also, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had been given their inheritance on the east of the Jordan. They settled their families and flocks there, and then the men left them to accompany the other 9.5 tribes across the Jordan to assist them in conquering the land. That being done, they returned to their inheritance. But at the Jordan, they erected an altar of stones, not for sacrifices, but as a reminder to their descendants and the descendants on the west of the Jordan that they belonged to Israel.
There are a number of occasions in my walk with the Lord where I see these stones of remembrance. Having worked for Canadian Tire Corporation for 14 years, I had progressed through the ranks to the place where I could realize my dream of obtaining my own Canadian Tire store. In 1968, the paperwork was in order and the finances was in place. I was at a crossroads. I knew God was calling me to go into full-time ministry.
The decision to enroll in Bible college sent Allan in a totally different direction with a total change in lifestyle. This was the first of many stones of remembrance that would mark his life's journey. Returning to college, moving to Toronto, and finding the finances were, for Allan, huge challenges.
But when I submitted to the Lord's leading, He provided. In 1982, after marriage, 10 years of pastoral ministry, and the blessings of 5 wonderful children, Florrie and I faced a new challenge. We were asked to take on a Canadian directorship of gospel recordings.
This particular ministry would require us to step out by faith with no promised support. We were not to do any deputation work to raise funds or to make our needs known. We had no house since we were living in a parsonage. One missionary couple pledged $100 per month. We struggled with this decision, but of one thing we were certain. If God was truly calling us to do this, He would provide.
This second stone of remembrance set our lives in a whole new direction. God proved His faithfulness in providing a home, supplying us month by month with the finances needed, and blessing the ministry.
While serving with gospel recordings, Allan was on a field trip to Nairobi, Kenya in 1988. There were a good number of Christian radio stations in this city, but as he traveled to areas outside the city, he discovered there was no or little electricity and no one had radios.
If only there was a solar-powered radio, fixed tuned to Christian stations. People could hear the gospel message 24/7. As I returned home, God placed within me the motivation to adopt a pocket-sized transistor radio, to make it solar-powered, and fixed-tuned it.
At the same time, God was speaking to a pastor and engineer named Ken Crowell, who had established a tent-making ministry in Tiberias, Israel. Ken and his wife Margie had gone to Israel to launch a fledgling electronics business where they could employ believers alongside Jews and Arabs in order to bring the gospel to this Jewish community. God placed on Ken's heart the need to design a fixed-tuned radio. He had a couple of his engineers drop the design. He looked at it, but he didn't know what to do with it. He placed it in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet.
A few months later, he traveled to Tampa, Florida, for a conference. There he ended up sitting across the table from a businessman, Harold Kent. Harold asked him, "What do you know about fixed-tuned radios?" Ken immediately responded, "Why do you ask?" Harold remarked that God had told him to place fixed-tuned radios all over the world. As Harold and Ken talked about this vision, Harold ventured that if he provided the funds, Ken would start manufacturing the radios in a section of his factory. But what would he do with the radios once they were made?
On his flight from Tel Aviv to Tampa, Ken had noticed a brochure in the seat pocket of the airplane. It told of a missionary in Canada who had made a solar-powered fixed-tuned radio. As Ken shared this with Harold, they agreed immediately to contact this Canadian. Of course, that was Allan. God brought together 3 couples from 3 different countries who hadn't known each other, but to whom he had given the same vision. They met together, prayed together, and agreed that this was God's unmistakable leading.
God led these men to begin a totally new ministry. In August of 1989, Florrie and I went to Israel to see Ken's facilities. He had already started manufacturing radios, and the first 40,000 went to the Good Fence in Lebanon and were being distributed throughout the Middle East. It was my responsibility to form a new missionary agency in Canada, Galcom International. I would contact missionaries and national workers around the world to see where the radios could be used most effectively and handle the administration work involved. This was the third stone of remembrance that set in motion the Galcom ministry.
In 1993, in partnership with Jim Cunningham from the States and Ross Robbins with Light of the World Ministries in Toronto, we were challenged with the need for a radio station in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. We had not been involved in radio station installations up to this point. The need was great, and we watched as God put all the pieces together in providing the exact AM transmitter needed through James and contacts through Ross.
God provided the finances for us to proceed, so off we went. God provided miraculously for every single need on that strip, including protection during a gasoline embargo placed in Haiti, which created severe unrest. This was another stone of remembrance as we branch out into the radio station installation.
In the mid-1990s, God led us to assist with the ministry of Fausto and Miriam Sebiera to help provide radios for Guatemala. This faithful couple had made inroads into numerous indigenous peoples groups throughout the country. With food, clothing, agricultural knowledge, and love, they traveled thousands of miles around the country, often by donkey or on foot. They visited and revisited these communities over many years, sharing the gospel and establishing churches. They started a radio ministry, but so many of these people did not have radios.
Galcom was able to come alongside and start providing thousands of solar-powered fixed-tuned radios. We learned so much from the dedicated couple about how to minister effectively, knowing the needs of the people, leading them to the Lord, establishing churches, training up leaders, and establishing training facilities. This stone of remembrance would help shape our outreach. With over 12 stations now broadcasting the gospel and over 100 churches planted, God was doing amazing things in Guatemala.
We met Russell Stendhal, a missionary with Columbia Para Cristo, at Mission Fest, Vancouver. When he saw the solar-powered fixed-tuned radios, he was more than a little excited. He already had several radio stations running in Colombia and had a fruitful ministry in many sectors, including the Colombian military, the guerrilla forces, and the general population. He challenged us to provide them with 100,000 radios within the next 5 years. At the time, the radios cost $20 each. This was a $2 million project.
We discussed and prayed about this project with our own board and with our counterparts in Tampa. We had never before taken on such a huge task. As well, we didn't want to jeopardize our work with other countries while concentrating on this huge order. As we prayed, we realized that God was in it and agreed to proceed. God blessed in so many ways as these radios were distributed among the military, the guerrillas, and the rest of the population, often by parachute. The gospel was hugely effective in this country spiritually through this endeavor. And so another stone of remembrance was set up to remind us that no project was too great for our God.
For many years, starting around 1998, we were looking for a leader to take up the reins at Galcom. Allan was already in his 60s and knew that it would take time for someone to really grasp all that the ministry involved, especially passing on relationships with other ministries, missionaries, and national partners. Several possible leads and resumes led nowhere. We continued to pray and seek God's will, knowing how important this was. Years went by, and still we did not see God's answer.
One day, as I preached at a supporting church, I had already started to leave the pulpit, and the Lord impressed on me the need to share this concern. I returned to the pulpit and asked the people to pray with us for someone to take over the leadership of the ministry. God very clearly prompted Tim Whitehead to respond to that call. When we first started looking, Tim was still in school. God was preparing him through all those years of waiting until just the right time. Now the time was right, and another stone of remembrance was set in place, reminding us of God's faithfulness.
In 2008-2009, God gave us a vision to reach Greenland and the province of Quebec with Christian radio. Greenland had almost no evangelical outreach anywhere, except in the capital of Nuuk. We met Errol Martins at Mission Fest, and when he saw the radios, he remarked how they could be used in Greenland. He put us in touch with Pastor John Nielsen. John had a solid ministry in Nuuk and was very interested in radio.
It took almost 10 years to get approval for the Christian radio station. Once the mother station was installed, we immediately went to work to put in 3 more stations. A year or so later, we took 4 father, son, and daughter work teams and installed 7 more stations.
Several more have been installed since then to cover almost 100% of the population. God enabled us in so many ways to reach this neglected population with the gospel. Another stone of remembrance was added in being able to reach an entire land with the message of Christ.
For many years, we were concerned about the need of the gospel to penetrate the province of Quebec. It was a long, prayerful struggle getting approval for a license, and along the way, plans changed. The mother station was installed in Brownsburg in November 2021. The vision was to place 100 repeater stations throughout the province to provide access 24/7 to the Word of God.
The first repeater station was on the air in Rivière Rouge, November of 2022. God willing, 9 more repeaters will be added in the next little while. God is answering prayer, and we are trusting that many souls will be added to His kingdom as the good news is broadcast throughout this province. This stone of remembrance has shown us that when God gives a vision for His work, He will carry it through.
Now at age 85, I have retired from active leadership at Galcom. I'm slowing down physically and mentally and need to shift gears. As I look to the Lord for what He has for me in the time I have left, there is confidence in knowing that He always has a plan. Where will the next stone of remembrance be laid? Only God can answer that. Meanwhile, our task is just to wait on Him and be swiftly obedient to all that He has set before us. Where is God leading you in your journey with Him? Watch for His leading and place these stones of remembrance on every turn. They will attest to His love in leading you all along the path of His choosing.